Hello everybody, my name is Professor Raffle and welcome to my video on the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, one of the most destructive conflicts in human history. Now, if you haven't seen my videos on Fingolia and the Hwan Empire, please do so right now, as you're going to be kind of confused by what is happening here. But for now, we're going to start off from the beginning and then kind of work our way towards the battle and then the aftermath of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar in future installments of this series. This will be a three-parter, so do keep that in mind. So for now, let's start at the beginning. What is the Finno-Korean Hyperwar? The Finno-Korean Hyperwar has its origins in 4chan. Now, on 4chan, there was discussion over a EU4 or EU3 map right here of Korea, expanding from the peninsula of Korea and then snaking all the way to Europe. This is what we call the inciting incident. The inciting incident was talking about this Korean expansion. Afterwards came, of course, the revelation that this map is reminiscent of the map of the Hwan Empire, the Hwanguk of what we know as the Hwandangoji, which is basically a collection of texts that were created to talk about an ancient Korean kingdom that existed thousands of years before other kingdoms that existed like Sumeria, Harappa, ancient Greece, all that shit. Now, alongside this connection was, of course, another user talking about how the ancient Korean kingdom once fought the ancient Finnish Empire. And thus, the Finno-Korean Hyperwar was born, basically, between a shitpost thread of these two empires being basically related to this super Korean snake empire in EU3, essentially. This thread comes to us at about January 2016, and it's a very small inciting incident. However, it will have massive ramifications when we get into February 2016, when we have 4 mega threads being created on 4chan on the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. These 4 mega threads are what I consider to be the golden goose of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. This is where it comes from. This is exactly what takes place. This is where the meme originates from. And we see that all of these users here are compiling together different texts, images, and recounts of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar and what happened in this conflict. And it's pretty crazy, actually. We're not seeing 5 people. We're not seeing 1 person. We're seeing hundreds of people add in their own expertise of what they think the Finno-Korean Hyperwar is and what happened. And this didn't come out of nowhere at all. We even have threads going back to 2015 and 2009 that talk about the ancient Finnish Empire and the Hwan Empire respectively, because we know that people have been talking about Hwanguk for a long time, and the ancient Finnish Empire of Fingolia has been talked about a lot as well. Now, if you've seen my video on Fingolia, you know that the meme of Fingolians is very old. So because of that, we have two of these pseudo-historical memes. One of them based in the reality of the Hwandangoji, the other one completely made up because of Fingolia. And so because of that, we have the combination of Hyperwar. That is where we get Finno-Korean Hyperwar. What does Hyperwar mean? Hyperwar is essentially coined by a fictional book about how war is basically operated by AIs, essentially. And it's shown off right here, the technology of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. We see that we start with the early hominids, and then we get on to the African Proto-Kangdoms, and then there's a humongous technological boom here where we get the Finnish and Korean empires. And here you can see the beam, hole left behind, the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. So we could have been here, we could have had air fryers in our assholes, but nope, we go down and we're basically right over here in this section of history. We will talk about these other epochs of history later down the line. If you want to know about a meme version of this timeline, you can watch my video on alternate history be like and ancient aliens be like. So that is basically the gist of it. That's where it comes from. That's where we know it comes from. And what I have done is compiled hundreds of 4chan texts. Peep my motion right here. There is so much shit going on with the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. And you can see that, again, hundreds of people are making their own interpretations of what this war is all about. It's a collaborative effort. One of the few collaborative funny efforts that we see 4chan actually take place on the /his board. This is all happening on the /his board. And basically, from these 4 mega threads, we will see a few other threads pop up later down the line. But after that, That's basically it. It's canonized. We have Wikipedia articles that are basically made, like Uncyclopedia. We have fandom wikis, a bunch of stuff. It's a hodgepodge of different ideas being mixed in, and even a lot of Reddit posts, such as this map over here, and also this map over here, and also, I cannot think for now. Yeah, those two maps actually, for now. So this right here is a meme that is constantly in flux and development and change. That's how we know about what the Finno-Korean Hyperwar is, where it comes from, where our information comes from. This is important because when we talk about the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of shit. So let's start at the beginning. Where does the Finno-Korean Hyperwar take place? Well, it takes place at about 59,745 BCE with the ancient Finnish Empire right here expanding across Europe. This is the earliest time period that we see right here. However, if we take the story as listed by the eve of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar in a Reddit post actually, we come to know that the history of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar is actually the history of multiple human empires rising and falling through history, basically. We see here on this map a more ancient map of the Atlantean Empire, the Empire of Lemuria, Kingdom of Mu, and Kumari Kingdom, and the Hyperborean Confederation. This is an early look of what could be the empires before the Finnish and Korean empires, basically. Now, there are some mistakes here. I don't know what the fuck this is, and this is definitely not Lemuria, and there's a bunch of other stuff going on, but everybody's interpretation of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar is different, and it's also valid in some way. The way I went about this video was if somebody said something that was regurgitated by another person, I counted it as a proper source. So when you see the Hwan Empire exists. You see Lemuria exists, because these places have been mentioned multiple times. When someone mentioned Jewish Andromeda in the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, that wasn't included. Why? Because nobody else regurgitated that. And it's a little cringe. Do we have to add in Jewish Andromeda aliens? Like, come on, guys. So that's basically the earliest period of these human empires here. But we also have the primordial aspects of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar too. Mainly this image over here of an ancient Turkish deity battling what we know as the Jews. You see this giant cockroach over here battling these primitive lizard men creatures here. This might be in reference to the Andromeda Jews, as we can see right over here, but we really don't know. We don't know much about this image. We don't know if it's in the, I mean, it looks like this is where the dinosaurs are, because you could see like the pterodactyls over here and shit like that, or maybe they're just crows. I'm not really entirely sure here. We see also the reptilian aspect look of the Jews in question. So they might just be living in this environment that's made for them, which would be in, you know, the dinosaur times when like things were hotter. There was like more and more like climates that were adapted for reptilian creatures and stuff, and definitely also larger insects and arachnids, right? As you can see right here with this Turkish deity. That's basically kind of the earliest time periods we can see of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar is both of these pictures here. But we also, again, like I said beforehand, have the ancient Finnish Empire. So how we go about to this map, it's going to take a while, but I will explain it surely but slowly. First and foremost, you must come and realize that we are talking about the Ice Age period here, where we have much of the map being covered up in massive glaciers. You can see right over here, most of this area here is covered in these massive glaciers. The sea levels have not risen at all. So because of that, huge amounts of land masses are basically existing that we would have never known about before, such as Doggerland, for example, Sundaland, for example. This is just a look of the map without Lemuria and Mu. But over here, I have a map with Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, all that shit. Here is another map too of the Empire of Atlantis, and at its peak basically, alongside Mu and Lemuria and Hyperborea. I find that this map, even though I made it, is the most reputable map of the bunch, honestly. I've really taken it a huge painstaking degree to make this as accurate as possible. However, we still do not know much about this period, so I just put tribes of man, honestly. There's just so much that we don't know of what existed in this time period because of the effects of the Giza mass autism array, as well as the destruction of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. As you can see, the knowledge went down all the way here. So we are back at square one, where we're eating with our hands basically at this point. And before, we were eating with like our laser beams. So that's basically the timeline that we know so far. Millions of years ago, we have the ancient Turkish deity battling the Jews. We assume the KT asteroid happened, which annihilated the dinosaurs, and the Jews and Turks survived. And then, of course, millions of years later, at about 59,745 BCE, we have the ancient Finnish Empire that is formed. They are formed, if you have seen my video on Fingolia, from basically Turanians that migrate north from the Tower of Babel and end up in Fingolia. And later on, they settle as the Proto-Finnics up north in northwestern Fingolia. You can see here, Tower of Babel, Turan, Fingolia, and then over here, the Proto-Finnic settlements. So they're making their way there. And then afterwards, we see the ancient Finnish Empire expand rapidly. And as they expand rapidly, they will be in conflict with the Empire of Atlantis. We don't really exactly know when the Empire of Atlantis was formed, nor do we know about Hyperborea, actually. These are two kingdoms that's very ancient. We know that the Empire of Atlantis was one of the first human empires in existence. And Hyperborea is a very strange case, honestly. So we don't really want to necessarily like pinpoint a time period. We might say that this might be at about 100,000 BCE, right? 100,000 BCE. And the only reason why we're saying 100,000 BCE is because we're talking about the Ice Age. But not only that, we're talking about the last glacial period and the last glacial maximum. This is where we see basically the ice levels increase to degrees in which the Empire of Atlantis loses its advantage in water-based technology and conquest. As you can see right here, Atlantis is only really controlling this inner Atlantic Ocean area basically, and a little bit of Mediterranean and some of the Caribbean and stuff like that. And that is mostly because they are only concerned with the ocean, as they are basically worshippers of Poseidon, and Poseidon gives them boons in this realm basically, so to speak. So the earlier map over here of where Atlantis owns like this inner Asian area and stuff, it's probably a little bullshit, honestly, because like, why would they do that? So ultimately, we think scholars at the University of Raffles do believe that this is basically the time period in question. However, we'll talk about more of Atlantis and its proper setting in history in its own video dedicated to Atlantis. But for now, though, we're going to go back to the ancient Finnish Empire and Hwan Empire. So the ancient Finnish Empire is expanding while battling in the Atlantean Finnish Wars, and we see here eastward 26,421 BCE, they found the city of Moscow. Moskova is basically a huge city, and they start to expand eastward after that. That is because Proto-Finnics basically are expanding eastward after their conquests in the west basically. Because of that, as they expand eastward, they will eventually reach, of course, the Korean Peninsula, where they will meet a certain deity and they will form the Hwan Empire. So we first start off again with, of course, the Tower of Babel, right? The Tower of Babel basically is mankind's attempt to reach heaven. God thinks of this as hubris, and so because of that, this scatters humanity between the different cultures and like tribes and languages and shit like that, scrambles their languages, stops a common like human tongue from existing, and so because of that, humanity is just basically going all over the place basically from this point onward. Some of these humans go all the way to Turan, as I say in my Fingolia video, and then they go to Fingolia, and then they afterwards formed the ancient Finnish Empire under, of course, Emperor Väinämöinen. Emperor Väinämöinen, who I also have over here. I don't know why I just have two pictures. That's just what the printer did. But anyway, Emperor Väinämöinen is one of the first elected rulers of the ancient Finnish Empire. If you know from my Fingolia video, you would know that basically the ancient Finnish Empire is part basically of a successive like lineage of Khaganates of Fingolians that have always existed. And then basically through their collaboration in the Proto-Finnic lands, they coalesced together into one combined force, basically. We can see right over here a small blip, right? That is supposed to be the first settlement of the Proto-Finnics. Now, once they elect a certain ruler who was basically the mayor of Helsinki, which was actually a fishing village before the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate was established, Emperor Väinämöinen, who, if you know, Väinämöinen is a demigod from ancient Finnish mythology. He is said to be the first human in existence. And so because of this, he is tasked with ruling over the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate. Where is a good magnet for me? Right there. And here we have some pictures of the Proto-Finnic settlements. We have one of them in springtime. We have one of them in snow time. This is very reminiscent of course, Hyperborea. In fact, the Proto-Finnic settlements in the early days will take much of their inspiration actually from Hyperborea. Here we have an image of Hyperborea, though of course many would call this Agartha. This isn't Agartha, retard. This is Hyperborea. So this is fucking Hyperborea, and we can see the mammoths here. Mammoths were used en masse in the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate. And so both of these empires would share some similarities between each other, but they will more or less separate on many issues. Of course, Hyperboreans don't have sex to reproduce, so that's one thing that they will be different on. Here we have an image of Fingolians. These are some Fingolians here ready for battle, and these are Fingolians sacking a city here. These are similar images that you've seen to my Fingolia video, so don't worry if I'm going a little too fast, as you can always see them in their dedicated video here. What I want to talk about, however, is this image over here of a Spurtle Sparde going, "Charge mammoth for Ibingulks Fugingurians Pro." And this is a Spurtle Sparde, which is essentially a Fingolian or a Proto-Finnic that is infused with the power of the Otso. The Otso is essentially a holy spirit animal, a bear. And because of this, the Proto-Finnics are able to gain the essence of the bear and become a bear-like creature, that being Spurtle Sparde. You can see the mammoth basically plowing through what we seem to be Koreans. However, they also look like Fingolians as well. So we don't really know the full history here. We know that there was a period of warfare between the Fingolians and the Proto-Finnics, so it's very possible that this could be Koreans, this could be Proto-Finnics, but obviously the guy is saying Korean, so we don't really fully know the circumstances of this. But over here, we have an image of a Fingolian trying to tame a mammoth. As you can see, he is running for his dear life because a mammoth is fucking huge, and so it takes a lot of time to tame one of these massive beasts of burden. A mammoth would be seen as a loyal pet and follower of the Fingolians, and not only will the Fingolians or Proto-Finnics use them in labor, but they will also use them as one of the first pre-horse archers in human history. I will display an image of the pre-horse archer right here, right there, right there. I don't know why I didn't print it. I have only so much ink, you know. Another picture of, are Finns really white? And you can see their Fingolian ancestors in the background mocking this Finnish woman who is obviously being possessed by the spirit of Väinämöinen coursing through her body. You can see this blue surging through her, as you can see right here, and you can see right here. Right here. All Finnish people have the psychic ability to tune in to their ancestors' memories. In fact, a lot of our information on the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, what we assume to be 4chan posts and ship posts from 4chan and Reddit and all these sites, are actually people using their inner cognitive abilities, their hidden psychic abilities that have been locked away to basically explore the memories of their ancestors. In Y.S. Cham's essay on the Hwan Samoy Hyperwar and who fired the Giza mass autism array, it actually goes into the detail. The idea of what we know as Volkgeist is basically translated to nation spirit. In the essay, he argues that not only do nations have inhabitants, but those inhabitants of the nation form the body of that nation. And so they also form a spiritual connection. So for example, if you're an Italian man, if you open up your third eye, you can access the memories of previous Roman emperors and soldiers and bakers and prostitutes and all that stuff. You know, just as I'm a Persian guy, I can unlock my previous ancestry of being a goat herder, a kebab maker, all that stuff. So basically, Volkgeist, nation spirit over here, right? Channeling that. And so that is where we're seeing this happening. This woman realizing her inner Fingolian past and history with the nation spirit. Here we have another image of Fingolians sacking a city. You can see here Estonia and Finland flags over here. We see here that this could be a reference to the Finno-Ugric people or the Ural-Altaic language family. Now, this apparently has been debunked, but actually this was the norm of all these different peoples collaborating together to sack cities and destroy them. Now, obviously they're using horses, which is actually not true. Over here, we have the greatest Finnish achievement, Spurto Sparde. And it's very true, honestly. Being able to access the powers of the Otso gave the Finnish an advantage innately over their Atlantean partners. They're basically able to push forward and attack the Atlanteans and take over their settlements, especially because the Atlanteans excel at naval warfare, not on land-based warfare against mammoths and stuff. This is what we talk about in our Fingolia video. And so because of that, the Atlanteans are dealing with what we know as the Atlantean or Atlantis Finnish whoops, I almost forgot how to spell Finnish. Wars. The Atlantis-Finnish wars basically are something that dominates the European continent. And we talk about the Finnicization of the European inhabitants, the tribes of man that existed that were like that were basically Neanderthals or Homo sapiens essentially existing on the European continent, or also Nephilim. Three groups existing here are basically turning into Finnish citizens, and the Proto-Finnic Empire will start to expand rapidly from this. Where's the picture of the Proto-Finnic Empire? Fuck, I gotta find that shit. Now, while the Finnish and Atlantean wars are happening, the Finns are expanding in all directions. We even see a colony here in Greece called Samoy-Kareja, right over here, where they establish Athens and Constantinopolian. Actually, this is a mistake because this actually is not Constantinopolian. It should be Listanbuli, but we will talk about that later on. So they're expanding eastward basically, and a lot of these expansion efforts by the Proto-Finnics end up as failures. However, a contingent of them will eventually reach the Korean peninsula over here. If you have watched my video on the Hwandong Goji and the Hwanguk, you will know about the successor kingdoms of Hwanguk and Baedal that came from the Hwan Empire. The Hwan Empire came way before that actually, as Hwanguk is theorized to exist in about 8000 BCE or something like that. You can watch my video on the Hwanguk for that information. But for now though, we see here that the Finns are moving eastward, and they will eventually reach what we know as Mount Taebaek. This is where we see, of course, the Korean gods Dangun, Hwanin, and Hwanung. So over here, Hwanin is basically the ruler of Hwanguk and its founder. Hwanung is the ruler and founder of Baedal, and Dangun is basically the ruler and founder of the ancient Go-Joseon kingdom, basically. These three rulers are what we know as the traditional rulers and leaders of the three ancient Korean empires. But of course, they forget the fourth Korean empire. That is because it is lost to us because of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. So these old fucks basically are actually not Korean. Believe it or not. They are Finnish derived. That is because the Proto-Finnics, otherwise known as the Boem tribe or the Bear tribe or the bear in the tale of Hwan, where the bear and the tiger are praying to Hwan to become the first humans in Korea, or the first divinely inspired humans in, of course, the Hwandan Goji. The Hwandan Goji would argue that the bear and tiger were not praying to become humans. The bear and tiger were part of the bear and tiger clan of humans, and these humans wanted to be divinely guided and spiritual and enlightened people. And they prayed to Hwanin, and Dangun to become these peoples. Well, actually, the bear and tiger tribe will pray to Hwanung to become that. Again, watch my Hwangok video on that. So the Hwandan Goji talks about this. But as is said in the Finno-Korean Hyperwar texts that are locked in a vault in Pyongyang, defended by proto-ninjas under the Kim family of North Korea, it talks about how the fourth Korean Empire were Proto-Finnics moving eastward. This bear tribe were actually Proto-Finnics that were blessed by the Otso, the bear. And so because of that, they were basically given spiritual enlightenment from the local divinities there. And so they were given basically blessings that allowed them to basically conquer not only their initial territory, but all of Eastern Asia as we know it. Here, of course, we have an image of one of the first divinely inspired humans. Here you can see his attire, very reminiscent of Native Americans. As you know, because of the Hwandan Goji, Native Americans come from Korea. So, as you can see, this Native American head garment and this dress is actually a Korean dress and head garment. And the Native Americans were just appropriating it. Now, the first Hwan ruler would be known as Kim Il-sung First Hwan, right? This ruler will basically reincarnate himself every 100 years into a new body in order to become the eternal leader of the Hwan Empire. And so from that establishment at about 13,000 BCE, the Hwan Empire will expand in all directions as well. Now, a large part of their development and their advantage in conquest not only came from their connection to the Proto-Finnic settlers here, and not only from their divine inspiration from the local divinities in the area, but it also came from their connection to mammoths. Much like the Finns, mammoths were basically traveling, okay, from all the way in the Americas across Eurasia. And so the Proto-Finnics utilized mammoths to great extent to expand out in the ancient Finnish Empire, as was used by their Fingolians previously, as they were battling it out amongst their tribes and stuff like that. Fingolian warriors and clansmen and Khaganates would often collect as many mammoths as possible in order for them to flex their status and wealth over their rivals. And so the same usage of mammoths would be seen with the Hwan Empire. The Hwan Empire would use these mammoths to dominate the local peoples around the area. Here we can see an image of Kim Il-sung right here, as well as the rest of the Kim family and their 1 trillion eunuchs that were behind them. Now, over here, we see a recounting of Gojoseon or Beidal in the Hwandan Goji, where you have the tiger and the bear trying to become a human from Hwanong himself. Of course, in the Hwandan Goji, this is the bear clan, which are humans, and the tiger clan, which are humans as well, trying to become more divinely inspired humans. And then we have 2 very famous maps of the Hwan Empire. This is one right over here where you see ancient relics and like inspirations from many different cultures that basically trace their origin to the Hwan Empire. We have the Moe statues over here that can be traced all the way to the Hwan Empire. We have statues here of the Sphinx that can be traced all the way to the Hwan Empire, and many, many more. If you know Korean, please let me know. I tried to put this shit in Google Translate. It did not sound good. It looked really fucking stupid. So we can see that the Hwan Empire had expansions all across Eurasia, basically, and even the Americas, as the Hwan Empire we know of actually encompassed all of the Pacific Ocean, but more on that later. Here's another Korean map detailing the Hwan Empire. You can see even the migration patterns, how they start off right over here in Hwanguk at 7,197 BCE, then they go eastward to Baidal, or to actually the Americas over here, and then some of them, they end up going eastward to Gojoseon, some of them go to China and establish the Yellow River civilizations. Some of them go westward to Sumeria and establish those. Some of them go southward and establish the Indian civilization as well. So this is essentially the Hwandong Goji's retelling of the Hwanguk Empire. But as we know, the Hwan Empire is really this right here. These two images very, very well illustrate the Hwan Empire's maximum extent during the Finno-Korean Hyperwar and also beforehand as well. We can see here that these orange peripheries are essentially their conquests in the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, and over here is their possible maximum extent here. Again, even though it says 7,197 BCE, we know that this is actually the fourth Korean Empire, the Hwan Empire, and not Hwanguk. Write that down so you're not confused. We have Hwan Empire, 13,000 BCE, Hwanguk, 7,197 BCE, Baidao, 3,897 BCE, and Gojoseon, 2,333 BCE. Again, if you want more information on Hwanguk and Hwandong Goji, you can watch my video on the Hwandong Goji. Now, you might be asking yourself, so the Hwan Empire is expanding massively, the ancient Finnish Empire expanding massively, will the two empires ever meet? And the answer is yes, because the two empires are actually not separate at this moment, they're actually part of one united empire. Proto-Finnics were aiding the Hwan Empire. They were basically one people that had one culture, one religion, and shared one language, that being of course the Turanian language that the Fingolians basically practiced back in the day. They would even go so far as to connect their capitals with magic rune stones, which would allow someone, if they wanted to teleport from Helsinki all the way to Pyongyang right over here, teleporting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Trade deal would actually be happening between both empires. You see, the Finns would send in, you know, mammoths, which Finnish mammoths are considered like the Arabian horse of the world at this time. They're more hardier, they're better looking, like they're just so good. But the Koreans will counter this with sending in K-pop albums. The Finns will also send in rotten fish as well. As you know, Finnish people are very, very fond of eating rotten fish without any seasoning whatsoever. And this trade, this connection between the both capitals, basically makes sure that these two empires right over here are going to be friends for life. But a rift starts to form. You might notice the name Turanian that I said beforehand. Turan essentially is the thing that starts the rift between these two empires. Like I said beforehand, Proto-Finnics come from Turan, right? Because Fingolians came from Turan. That means, ergo, because the Hwan Empire came from Proto-Finnics, that the Hwan Empire also came from Turan as well. That means Turan is the shared homeland of both the Finnish people and the Korean people. Now, you may be asking, if both these empires are expanding at the same time and they're encroaching upon Turan very, very slowly, eventually they're going to both reach Turan. Which begs the question, who should own Turan? Who should tax it? Who should administer it? Blah, 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 blah. And this causes enough of a diplomatic rift between the two that they shut off the teleporters between both capitals and they nearly go to war. Now, cool heads do prevail in the end, and essentially a cohort of Nephilim tasked with basically administering the land of Turan. It is demilitarized and both empires cannot own the territory whatsoever. So the trade deal is gone basically. We stop trading, we stop connecting our capitals, and we essentially have a demilitarized zone right over here, Turan. As a shitty marker. So you see that Turan basically becomes this demilitarized zone. Now, afterwards, both empires back off. right? They still want Turan, as you can see right here. They still want it. They'll still both be coveting for it. But because of that, an arms race starts to form. An arms race on the demilitarized zone. We see the Finnish forces here on the left, and we see the Hwan forces on the right. This comes from Battalion Wars 1 or 2, which was obviously a allegory for the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, actually, as you can see right over here. So both empires are gearing up for a possible invasion of Turan and a possible war in the future. But obviously, because the Nephilim are still here, they're gonna control themselves. Both of these empires are basically eyeing up for a future conflict eventually, right? We see here, of course, a joint meeting between the Finnish sides and the Korean sides over who will own Turan, over the minutia of details between like who can have how many forces and like what fort, and like how much rotten fish was owed to the Finns and how much K-pop was owned to the Koreans before the trade deal like went away and stuff like that. So you see like some small bits of diplomacy between both sides, but ultimately this is basically the end of these people basically collaborating with each other. There will be small collaborations here and there, but we'll talk about those eventually. The Nephilim, however, you may be wondering, well, why are they so scared of Nephilim? Nephilim are not normal humans, okay? The Nephilim are descendants of angels that are basically created from angels descending down to earth to help humans, to guide them and stuff, and they end up reproducing with human females, creating these sons of God, or the Nephilim. As you can see from this image over here that shows off a normal human and these gigantic fucking Nephilim over here that could be about 36 feet tall basically. They are giant, they are magically attuned, and they have angelic divinity and ancestry. So they have powers beyond belief basically, knowledge beyond belief, and they're freaking fucking strong. And they would actually be the ones to teach humanity magic, slavery, warfare, and all that stuff, and corrupt humanity before Noah's flood. So because of that, God sent in the flood to destroy the Nephilim and the corrupted humanity, thus sparing Noah's family and allowing the earth to reset. Now, some of the Nephilim will survive in the highest mountains and stuff, and they'll live out their lives as like peacekeepers or like peacekeepers or kings and like mercenaries and wandering heroes essentially. The last Nephilim, funny enough, were seen battling US Marines in Afghanistan. So they are seen to be still surviving to this day, albeit in even far lower numbers than that of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, where their numbers were already decimated by Yahweh's flood. Because of the Nephilim here guarding Turan and this arms race, now both empires are going to try and destroy the link between them, right? So the Korean Empire over here, of the Hwan Empire, they're going to basically stop using the Turanian language, destroy any mention of Finnish Proto-Finnic ancestry, and try to adapt to the local cultures in this area, taking their language, their religion, and their culture with them. Thus, they now, at this point, become Koreans, essentially. The Proto-Finnics will do the same thing, cutting off all ties with their Korean brethren and focusing more on their Finnish side, and thus becoming more and more Finnish and removing that Turanian aspect from them. So this becomes the status quo for a while, but it doesn't last because the world is changing and geopolitics are constantly evolving. Both of these empires also are technologically advancing too. That is because of the efforts of the Proto-African Kangdoms. The Proto-African Kangdoms, after the loss of the early hominid civilizations, right, basically rise as the dominant technological power, and they're basically going to uplift the Finnish Empire and the Hwan Empire. So now we talk about the Proto-African Kingdoms. Now, the Proto-African Kingdoms are quite a mysterious origin, actually. We know that they come from the Empire of Shabazz that expanded out from Mecca and then conquered all the way across the African continent over here. But their story is very, very old. We hear it that 66 trillion years ago, the Empire of Shabazz were part of one of 13 tribes. Then, all of a sudden, a rogue scientist of that Empire of Shabazz, or one of the tribes, blew up the planet and split the moon from the planet. And so because of that, all the tribes died with the exception of the tribe of Shabazz. The Empire of Shabazz, however, will start to establish itself over here in the Nile River. Okay, then afterwards they will migrate all the way to Mecca, or Makkah, as it was called beforehand. So we see that from the explosion of the planet and the splitting off of the moon 66 trillion years ago, so we're going to write that down, 66 trillion years ago. Yeah, I don't know how that relates with the Turkish deity and the Jews, but let's stop right there. So 66 trillion years ago, they landed in the Nile, and then they move all the way to Mecca. They are a technologically advanced people, and so because of that, they have technology that is unseen by all the humans today. However, they're still behind the dominant power in Africa 66 trillion years ago, that being, of course, the early hominids. The early hominids would create many different beautiful cities over here that are very, very scientifically advanced. Here's one of them known as Gorilla City. And the early hominids are essentially not the late hominids over here of the Neanderthals, the Sapiens, and the Denisovans. They are like Homo habilis, for example, Homo erectus, for example. They are the many different early hominid peoples that existed before the late hominids over here. And their cities are magnificent. They are highly advanced and highly technologically powerful, actually. And some of them right over here would be winged and create monastic civilizations that worship the moon, and also their ape god Hanuman. The problem will come, however, with Yahweh's flood. You see, Yahweh's flood is going to annihilate the Nephilim. The hominids, however, know about this from visions from their god Hanuman, and so they will escape, of course. They will escape to their cities in the mountains of Kong and the mountains of the moon. The mountains of Kong extend across Africa over here, and the mountains of the moon go up north right over here. So you see that they're basically living in this mountainous area now to escape Yahweh's flood, which more or less is successful. They escape the wrath of Yahweh. However, though, Yahweh's flood infects the water supply of the early hominid cities. And so when they start to drink this water, they start de-evolving, becoming animals. By the time the early hominids figure out what's happening and they stop the consumption of this water and replace it and stuff, most of their civilization has already de-evolved. And so now the few cities of early hominids that are left run by them are living in the mountains of Kong and the moon, hidden away basically. And the rest of them are now living out an animalistic existence, while their cities remain barren and empty. This is where, of course, humanity enters the picture. We believe that the first African empire that existed in the continent actually were the Berber Empire over here, that existed from 30,811 BCE to 8,369 BCE, but this could be wrong. You know, we don't really fully know, essentially, but especially because I cannot read this font whatsoever. I can barely read this over here. But we seem to see that the Berber Empire existed from that point onward. It's possible that the Berber Empire got many of their technological advancements from the early hominid cities that were left behind from Yahweh's flood. And they were basically able to expand across the area and even make the tribe of Shabazz a tributary state. And that will be basically the existence of Africa for most of the time, until, of course, the efforts of Alberto Barbosa over here. Alberto Barbosa is one of the most famous leaders of the Wei-Wuz Empire. The Wei-Wuzians, right? They are a subsect of the tribe of Shabazz that basically left Mecca and pursued a more naval focus of life. They will expand and conquer Portugal, and then afterwards expand across Africa, defeating the Berber Empire and making them slaves of the Wei-Wuz Empire. So now Alberto Barbosa will have an empire from Portugal all the way across Africa and, of course, Arabia, with Berber slaves in mind. From this, we know that there's a little bit of a decentralization that happens, because once Alberto Barbosa dies, basically, the kingdom in question becomes the empire in question becomes a federation that is ruled by Wei-Wuz clan members, but also Kangs, and of course Sheed. These peoples over here, these would be the dominant clans and the dominant technocratic like overlords of Africa. And you will actually see this in some of their aristocracy. Right over here you see a Kang ruler over here with his white concubines. More on white people in a minute. And of course, we have a slew of different Sheed technologies here being developed. Here we have a mech suit over here with obviously state-of-the-art like targeting weaponry and laser beams and missiles. Here we have an exosuit that was worn by the best of the Hwan Empire's like armed forces, obviously commissioned by the Sheed clan. And then of course we have these soldiers over here, highly advanced super soldiers that were basically guarding the realm of Africa from the outside forces, so to speak. Do not mess with them. They have rocket launchers, they have laser beam like arrays over here. They are basically kitted out with vibranium armor as well. So they are rocking some heavy firepower. And more or less, there will be internal conflicts in this federation. We know that Hwan's aristocracy will often battle with Kangs and Sheed, obviously. We know that mad scientists from all three groups will jockey for influence and power. As you can see, right over here, we even have a small pyramid kingdom being created. More on the pyramids later, actually, but we believe that it was actually Alberto Barboso, who was one of the first creators of the pyramids. However, there have been multiple theories on the creators of the pyramids, such as Finns, Koreans, Africans, Atlanteans, Jinns. It continues on and on and on from there. Aside from this collaborative effort from many different groups on the pyramids, Africa was ruled by this federation of different clan peoples over here. A subsect, actually, of the tribe of Shabazz that were led by the ruler of Shabazz at the time would actually flee their technocratic cities of the Nile and Mecca and head over into actually the interior of Africa. So they will march and move all the way into the interior, into the jungle, forming what we know as the Melanid states over here. And obviously also creating the Hwan Empire, which was one of the most powerful Melanid kingdoms there. Now, the leader of the tribe of Shabazz left these technologically advanced areas and the more hardy and inhospitable conditions of inner Africa, mostly to maintain the Negroid features of the African peoples in question and hardening up for the coming conflicts ahead. And this isn't me being racist. Malcolm X would talk about the tribe of Shabazz's efforts to want to continue maintaining their Negroid features. Here's the quote.
He wanted the people to undergo a form of life that would make them tough and hard, and other scientists wouldn't agree with him. So this scientist named Shabazz took his family and wandered down into the jungles of Africa. Prior to that time, no one lived in the jungles. Our people were soft. They were black, but they were soft and delicate and fine. They had straight hair. Right here on this earth, you find some of them look like today. They are black as night, but their hair is like silk, and originally all our people had that kind of hair. But the scientist took his family down into the jungles of Africa, living in the open, living in jungle life, eating all kinds of food, had an effect on the appearance of our people. Actually, living in the rough climate, our hair became stiff like it is now.
Basically, everything's all good and well. We have like a mostly united Africa with a technologically inferior but much more hardy race of Africans here down south, and more or less things are fine until the advent of course, white people and Yakub. Yakub is a mad scientist. Yakub was born to a Meccan family right over here. He basically sees the weakness of the African peoples. Now, instead of leading his forces and going into the interior of Africa to maintain the African people, he instead will think, wait, what if the Africans had an enemy that would force them to evolve to become better? And that's where Yakub comes into his realm, into his idea, so to speak. If you watch my video, Black History Be Like, you will know that Yakub finds a brown germ in black people, and he theorizes that he could splice the germs from the black people and create white people this way. And so, over the course of many years, as he travels from Mecca and flees all the way to the island of Patmos in Greece, he creates different races from essentially having his followers have sex. The lighter skinned ones would be staying on his boat, the darker skinned ones would be thrown overboard. And thus, because of that, apparently this is the reason why there are darker skinned peoples in Africa to begin with, because of these rejected peoples, and also from the many different followers of his that believed that he was a fucked up man, so they had to escape Yakub's evil. And so because of that, Yakub will create the red race, he'll create the yellow race, and eventually create the white race. This right here, Homo whitanus, this is what we consider an early version of white people, so to speak. See the striking blue eyes? See the regal attire over here? This was Yakub's attempt to create a race that will push Africans to the limit. Unfortunately, however, for Yakub, he was a little too successful. As you can see right over here, the white people look upon a technologically advanced city of the Weywu's Federation, right? And so they theorize that we should kill all black people. They agree, and they start attacking them with primal fury. White people are not the same as normal human beings. They have razor sharp claws and teeth, and they can rip apart even the strongest of vibranium armor. And they are skilled in what we know as tricknology. Okay, I will spell that out right now. Tricknology. This is basically a magic and scientific system in which white people trick many different races into doing their bidding and manipulating them and stuff. And so because of that, the white people are wreaking havoc across Africa, so to speak, destroying the many different cities here, annihilating Weywus, Kangs, Sheed peoples, even having the Berbers join them in many different instances in their revolts. So you see that they are just descending and wreaking havoc. I'm going to display on you some screens of white people just. It is very disturbing. I will censor as much as possible, but do keep in mind that the annihilation here is because of the innate evil of white people, as you can see right here, their devilish nature. Now, over here, we have what would be a final attempt by the Weywu's Federation, led by Kangs and Sheed people, to drive out the white people here. We can see here that this is a Weywu's like soldier, pushing forward and pushing out the white people, okay? Now, because of this near societal collapse, white people will basically be enslaved by most of Africa, or most of the surviving peoples of Africa. And oftentimes they'll be traded by the many different powers. You will see white people in the Empire of Atlantis and many other different kingdoms as like slaves and like human sacrifices and maybe even bodyguards and stuff. Many of them will arrive in America and become like plantation slave workers. So ultimately, the black people of Africa survive. The Proto-African kingdoms do survive. But you can see right here that basically most of the control of Africa has been lost to them, right? Their interior areas here are completely lost. They are relegated to only the eastern side of Africa, the western side of Saudi Arabia, the Congo states here, basically are barely surviving, holding on together. The older Melanid Empire basically are completely destroyed. And now we don't even have a federation anymore, as you can see right over here. These are different independent states. So now the Weywus, Kangs, and Sheed people are actually independent kingdoms over here. And so are the Congo states. And now, instead of there being a apparatus that controls all these different peoples and clans and like cities and all that shit, now they're all fighting it out in the African Warring States period. So over here, their technological advantage that they had gained from the early hominids from basically going in, occupying these early hominid cities and taking over their technology and stuff, that goes away and they lose that technological advantage. And so now it's up to the peoples that they traded their technology with to continue their legacy. So that is why, even though the Proto-African kingdoms take the technology from the early hominids that were left behind, they will basically also be left behind by the Finnish and Korean empires because of the damage the white people caused upon Africa itself. But there's also another problem, and that is, of course, an invasion force. In the east, mind you, they are being invaded by what we know as the Hibernians. The Hibernians will come all the way from the sunken continent of Lemuria, and this is where we get on to Lemuria. So now we're talking about Lemuria, the sunken continent. This continent currently doesn't exist in our world map right now. That is because by the events of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, it is sunk into the bottom of the ocean, unfortunately, and essentially it has a very interesting history. Lemuria sits at a nexus point of multiple different, what we know as ley lines, right? Ley lines crisscross the entire planet essentially, and Lemuria is at the seat of them. All ley lines carry magical energy over here. This magical energy can be harnessed and used for spells, for rituals, for summoning deities and all that stuff. And so because of that, Lemuria sits at the largest nexus of it. Another nexus point would be, of course, Hyperborea over here. That is because Hyperborea is a place of eternal spring, so to speak, and Lemuria is a place of eternal jungle. And so because of that, Lemuria maintains a primeval jungle environment that is home to dinosaurs, same as Hyperborea. So you see the dinosaur right over here. Dinosaurs are seen as holy animals, avatars of a bygone age, essentially. This magical energy protected Lemuria from Yahweh's flood. So because of that, that is why Lemuria is basically in a pristine environment even to this day. Now, Lemuria has been inhabited by many different peoples. The first peoples that would inhabit Lemuria would be what we know as the serpent men. Now, serpent men over here are large bipedal reptilian creatures, basically, that thrive in Lemuria. They only exist in Lemuria and Hollow Earth, and we'll explain why they exist in Hollow Earth later. But essentially the reason why they exist in Lemuria is because the area is environmentally safe and prosperous for them. They exist and thrive in this jungle environment, in this hot, steamy environment with their gods, the dinosaurs. And of course, the actual gods that they worship being, of course, Yig and Set. Set is the creator of the serpent men, whereas Yig is the primordial god of all serpents. The serpent men, however, are led by, of course, what we know as dragon kings. Now, the dragon kings are very evil rulers. They focus on left-hand magic and necromancy, and they build humongous monolithic cities across Lemuria. And they create such evil wonders in Lemuria that oftentimes the gods in question are sickened by the serpent men. Even Yig himself is sickened by the serpent men. The only one that is satisfied is Set, who is an evil, chaotic god, and is seen to be the father, actually, of the dragon kings. Now, we don't know when in the Cretaceous period the serpent men in question were created, so to speak. We don't know if they were battling the Turkish deity, the Jews. We don't know how they survived the KT asteroid. But we theorize that because of the environmental challenges and changes, they were forced out of most of the earth and basically stayed in Lemuria because of what I said, the aforementioned safety in the environmental protection of Lemuria, their spiritual animals of the blessed dinosaurs being here, and also just the fact that it's just comfortable here, you know? But eventually, because of the tribes of man being developed and evolving and stuff, the Nephilim and shit like that from the Tower of Babel, they will make their way across India and into Lemuria. We don't know how or why they ended up here, but essentially this will cause what we know as the Dragon Wars. The Dragon Wars are fought between the first descendants of man and the serpent men who were ruled over by the Dragon Kings. And as you can see, it's a very bloody affair with humans and serpent men battling for domination of Lemuria. But because of the evil of Set and because of the righteousness of mankind, it seems as though Yig abandons the serpent men in favor of humanity. And because of this, the serpent men become weaker. And because of these losses, Set abandons the serpent men. And so the serpent men are left without their gods. And so now man, now infused with the power of their own gods, and the Nephilim and all that other shit, are marching into Lemuria and defeating the serpent men left and right and destroying the Dragon Kings. Once the Dragon Kings are annihilated, then they basically conquer all of Lemuria and defeat the serpent men. Now the serpent men have two choices. They can either adapt to this new world or they can perish. The ones that adapt, they do so, and they live peacefully in Lemuria along with the humans. The ones that don't, they escape and hide in Hollow Earth. And so that's why serpent men now live in Hollow Earth to this day that are against humanity. After this, we have a period of time in which serpent men and humans will reproduce with each other. So we have basically reproduction of both serpent men people and human people. Please ignore my look of the serpent men. It is very awful. And that in turn will create a hybrid race of both of these peoples. This hybrid race, of course, is multi-limbed, hermaphroditic, so they have both male and female genitals, and they have a very enlarged pineal gland that allows them to become more psychically and magically in tuned. And also, most importantly, they reproduce asexually. Just like, of course, the Hyperboreans that I talked about in my Fingolian video. So because of that, these Lemurian hybrid races basically dominate Lemuria as the new overlords. Now, a subsect of this hybrid race will ascend and become energy beings. These energy beings are basically the dominant spirits of Lemuria that protected and guard the ley lines and basically infused Lemuria with even more magic. They are the harvesters, the shepherds of the ley lines. The ones that do not actually become energy beings end up becoming actually normal ass humans who have a enlarged pineal gland. So now Lemuria is inhabited by energy beings and humans who have a larger pineal gland, allowing them to access magic and psychic energy more readily and harness the power of the ley lines in Lemuria. This in turn causes, of course, the Lemurian Warring States period. This period sees Lemuria dominated by many different tribes and clans who are using their own brands of magic. We have left, right hand, black, white, we have fire, air, water, earth, cum, all that stuff. And they're all fighting it out in Lemuria. The most dominant power of these people, of course, is the Hibernians. Hibernia actually comes from classical Latin. It is the name of Ireland, actually. Etymology of Hibernia more closely with Latin, you would get the word Hibernius, which means wintry land. That assumes basically that the Hibernians specialize in ice and cold magic. This magic is very, very powerful in Lemuria because, of course, it's an area that is all rainforest, primeval jungle made for dinosaurs. And because of that, the dinosaurs are weak to it, any of the serpent men people that are allies are weak to it, and any of these hybrid races are weak to it as well. They change the landscape to a more icy climate, which pisses off all the Lemurians. Remember, dinosaurs are seen as holy animals, so don't kill them. So because of this, the Hibernians dominate Lemuria for a time. And underneath it all, the different Lemurian clans start to scheme with each other, basically. They start to scheme. Now, an opportunity will come later down the line when the Hibernians will launch an assault on African Atlantis over here, and will start to attack African Atlantis. This is when we, of course, are talking about the Atlantean-Finnish wars. So with the Hibernians invading Atlantis and basically wreaking havoc while the Atlanteans are occupied, the commune of Lemuria attacks. The commune of Lemuria starts to sprout out across Lemuria itself, attacking Hibernian settlements across the area. They will create the Hibernian Civil War. This war essentially ties up the Hibernians in Lemuria and Africa, as they're now dealing with Atlantean forces here and Lemurian mages in Lemuria itself. And the apex of this war comes at the Battle of Uluru in Australia. Now, the commune of Lemuria is basically a cabal of many different magic users. We're talking every single magic user of Lemuria is basically part of this cabal that isn't part of the Hibernians, basically. That's how unpopular the Hibernians become. And during the Battle of Uluru, between this commune of Lemuria and the Hibernians, there is so much magical radiation that the local wildlife is mutated because of this. Here we enter, of course, the humble emu. The humble emu used to be just a normal bipedal flightless bird. Then, of course, because of the Battle of Uluru, the emu, along with the cassowary bird, are mutated. Their pineal glands expand, and they're able to access magical and psychic energy, harnessing their astral emotions, being able to access something known as the dreamlands, and using their dreams and emotions to annihilate humans, killing them in their sleep, destroying their minds, and basically becoming a threat to the entire human race. So Lemuria is basically a shit show at this time. I have a few pictures that I've added here. Here is a commune of Lemuria member summoning a demon or spirit in order to attract what we know as the Huz. The Huz in question over here is mortified by the magical prowess of this wizard. And over here we have the Lemurians over here. We believe these Lemurians are de-evolved versions of this type of Lemurian over here. So this type of Lemurian is possibly the hermaphroditic, magically inclined version of the Lemurians, and this is the de-evolved version, which is basically a human with an enlarged pineal gland. However, the unusual part is that there's no extra limbs or stuff. So maybe these are both de-evolved versions of Lemurians over here. Over here, of course, we have the energy being version of the Lemurians. We see that they've escaped their mortal confines of their bodies and are now spiritual energy beings that are basically existing within the ley lines, maintaining them as like shepherds, as farmers and stuff. Now the emus, because of what I said, they are uplifted, they have their astral powers, they have psychic energy, they're able to access dreamlands and stuff. They are basically extremely hostile to humans, and they are going to start attacking in all directions. They subjugate their cassowary brethren, and then they start attacking in Sundaland, they start attacking in Africa, and they also attack in Lemuria. Now, their attacks in Lemuria basically fail because of the ley lines basically being inclined to have magical hexes and defensive spells that prevent the emus from ever establishing a foothold in Lemuria itself. But all these conflicts distract the Hibernians enough for the commune of Lemuria to create a magical spell that exiles the Hibernians out of Lemuria and into Africa. And so now the Hibernians basically are relegated to the Eastern African continent, as seen right here below the Proto-African kingdoms of Wewus, Kang, Shid, Punt, and of course east of the Congo states, which were of course part of the Melanin Empire, or of course the Enshid Empire. So that's right now what's happening, and following this, we have a declaration of victory from the Lemurians. This text over here, made in ancient Enochian language over here, written on a stone tablet of unknown origin, basically declares the victory of the commune of Lemuria over the Hibernians. And so from their capital of Lemuria itself, with the Warlock Tower right over here, the commune of Lemuria basically dominates the continent. And essentially under their control, all magic is able to be practiced. You can practice any type of magic. You can do whatever you want, worship any type of god, and it's very decentralized and destructured. So because of that, now the commune of Lemuria is one of the foremost superpowers of the world, right over here, and also the most powerful, magically inclined nation as well. And of course, we have the Emu Confederacy that is expanding across the Pacific. They are a confederacy because they are a mishmash of different tribes and clans and all that stuff of the Emu people. So now, with everything that we just talked about Lemuria, and us leaving off with Africa over here, where it's now Hibernian Africa, we have to talk about the previous inhabitants of Eastern Africa. Yes, that's right. We're now talking about the fall of Atlantis. So now we talk about Atlantis, the first empire in human history. Now, I briefly talked about Atlantis in the Fingolian video, and I want to have a video dedicated to Atlantis, the myth, where it's located, in a future video at some point. But for now, we just have to talk about its role in the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. So as I've stated in the previous parts of the video, Atlantis is currently fighting against the Finns in the Atlantean-Finnish Wars. They are caught off guard by the Hibernians in the Hibernian invasion of African Atlantis. And so now Atlantis is basically relegated to its island, its main island here, the western coast of Africa, and the Americas over here. This is Atlantis at its height. You can see here it covers most of the Atlantic Ocean and dominates it as its own private empire. This is the capital of Atlantis, basically. Atlantis is divided by 10 different regions, which each are basically ruled over by a king. The king in question is typically a descendant of Poseidon. Now, what Atlantis has been doing for tens of thousands of years is something known as the Poseidon tax. They basically go across the planet and extract tribute from the many different tribes of man that existed across the world. That's what they did in Europa before the advent of the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate, who pushed them out of their prime tributary lands in Europe over here. As I've said beforehand, Atlantis is a mostly naval power. However, they do have some impressive ground troops at their disposal as well, and a variety of different technologies that I've already talked about in the Fingolian video. Their armies are equipped with armor and weapons made of a metal known as orichalcum. It's very unknown what orichalcum actually is. It was said to be adorned on the armors, on the weapons, and on many different frescoes and statues in the Atlantean Empire. But we again don't know. We assume that there are some sort of magical properties involved in orichalcum that allowed them to fight off against the magical and technological armies of the tribes of man and the Nephilim. So we don't really fully know its full extent. We do know, however, that the capital region of Atlantis could house 60,000 troops. So this is for the capital region, and each region governed by a different king would have a size appropriate army. But we can assume that the armies, if they are even close to the capital region, could number in the hundreds of thousands of troops armed with orichalcum. This is separate, of course, to the chariots that the Atlanteans are using and the cavalry that the Atlanteans are using. It is said by a source, by a Creatas at 119A, that 2 horses were basically given for every single Atlantean. So you see here that there is a huge focus on cavalry warfare in the Atlantean armies. That's because, of course, Poseidon is the god of horses as well. Not only the cavalry and the infantry, they are backed up, of course, by auxiliary troops, which are many different tribes of man that are recruited from vassal states that they own. This could be in the hundreds of thousands, and on top of that we have support troops, which could include many different types of slingers, archers, skirmishing units that are also in the hundreds of thousands. Then, of course, we have the main thrust of the Atlantean armed forces, and that would be its navy. 1,200 ships. 1,200 triremes right over here are patrolling the planet. This is the greatest navy to ever exist. As Plato has said it himself, they pretty much rule the world beyond the Pillars of Hercules, or Heracles if you're Greek. That would be this area right over here, the Strait of Gibraltar that I have drawn. Don't be mean. So ultimately, Atlantis, even while losing Europa, is still in a very dominant position. But given how they have to deal with the Finns and the Hibernians, there's another problem that the Atlanteans will deal with. That would be rebellions. As I've said before in the Fingolia video, Atlantis will deal with the rebellions of the black and white magicians. These are basically a type of debate going on in Atlantean magic schools, where they're arguing over, oh hey, I want to do left-hand magic and summon demons. I want to do right-hand magic and be a good guy and create plants. I want to do whatever the fuck. You know, these debates over magic also are assigned to their specific deities too, as if you're doing more left-hand magic and more evil magic, you tend to worship more eviler deities, thus keeping the Atlanteans away from Poseidon. The epicenter of these rebellions would actually come in what we know as the Maya. We'll start the black and white rebellions actually, and this will spread across the Atlantean colonies here. Now, unfortunately for the Atlanteans, because of the spread of the black and white rebellions, it will lead to them losing their white slaves in North America over here. These white slaves will break out and form what we know as the White Khaganate. Khaganate basically pushes out in all directions, conquering as much as possible. There are small, like, minor states that are part of the White Khaganate as like allies, such as of course the Mormon Kingdom of Deserta or the First United States of America, but basically they're all under the thumb of the White Khaganate. Loss of the Maya in Central America and the freeing of their slaves allows the Emus actually to move westward and then establish their own vassal states. Here they establish the Incan Empire. So you see the Incans are under the control of the Emus and they set up a good state right over there. The Atlanteans will continue losing even more colonies following the Emus' inclusion, as then we have the Huayish Empire that exists in modern day Brazil, which is made up of former Atlantean colonialists, Emu immigrants, and all types of shit. If this wasn't bad enough, Hyperborea, one of Atlantis's greatest allies who were instrumental in supplying Hyperborean super soldiers, they're also going through their own magical rebellions of left-hand versus right-hand magic, black and white rebellions. So now Hyperborea is also getting fucked up as well. This in turn basically allows the Hwan Empire right over here to expand to the western coast of the Americas and takes over the western coast here. Then of course we have the Finns, who will then expand westward and take out this northern eastern area of the United States, or not the United States, North America, for themselves. So you see over here on this map an early look of the far eastern, well, not the far eastern, but the western colonies of the Hwan Empire and the eastern colonies of the Finnish Empire over here. You still see like a little bit of the Atlantean Empire here, but by the time that the Hwan Empire and the Finnish Empire start getting set up, Atlantis will lose much of their holdings in the Americas actually. And you see that in this map over here, where they're mostly only relegated to the Caribbean and Florida. Worst of these conflicts, of course, comes from their fights and dynastic squabbles with the human cultists of Mu. Now, Mu is an ancient continent, one of the most ancient continents of the planet. See, a lot of people would argue that Lemuria was the one that caused the creation of the human race. Hyperborea. Some would even say Mu. But what we do know about Mu is that Mu is ruled over by gods that are very alien. These alien gods dot the landscape, and there are many cities dedicated to human sacrifice solely for them. Some of these gods, if you look upon them, they turn you to stone. And so most of these cities that have been filled with stone statues used to be cities that were appeasing these gods, pissed them off in some way and were then turned to stone. One of these gods being, of course, Gaffanatoa or something, Gaffanatoa. Now, due to the fact that Atlantis was one of the first human empires, they'll actually start to create some influence on Mu, being able to push some of the Muvian human cultists to worship of Poseidon. And this would especially be effective when they start intermarrying the Muvian aristocracy with the Atlantean aristocracy. Due to the influence of the black and white magicians, we then see some of these pro-Poseidon members over here, these aristocracies, push off worship of Poseidon in favor of more left-handed gods, more eviler and alien gods that they worshipped back in the day. Escalates even more when Atlantis even captures a Muvian princess, which leads to open fighting between Atlantean and Muvian aristocracy. You can see that shit is not good for Atlantis, and now they're getting caught up in a war on another continent while fighting already on one continent already. And also, the Africans see blood in the water. So now they too are going to attack the Atlanteans over here. See, Atlantis is declining at this point. They are caught off on so many different conflicts, and the Hwan and the Finnish empires are expanding rapidly. Now, at this point of time, conflict between the Eurasian powers is not happening yet, but it will happen because of course, the independent states in Eurasia. You see, as I've said beforehand, because of the situation in Turan, these empires are not really expanding over here. This is a demilitarized zone enforced by Nephilim. However, over here, we have a hodgepodge of different independent states that exist within this area over here. This area encompasses West Asia to about, I would say like India and Southeast Asia, though most of Southeast Asia, as you can see right over here, would be under the control of the Hwan Empire, under vassalage systems over here. This map is not super accurate. As you can see, the Empire Shabazz, as I said beforehand, was a federation and then fell apart and became the separate Proto-African kingdoms due to the events of blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, the Holy Atlantean Empire and all that shit. But what is accurate about this map are the various different kingdoms that existed in this small Eurasian territory here. We have a Nephilim kingdom. We have a Sumerian kingdom here. We have the Garden of Eden. Some would say that exists on Earth. Some would say that the Garden of Eden was like the 5th layer of heaven. Who knows? But we also see the various different states of India, most importantly, the atomic states of India. You see, it's because of the rise of the white people escaping out of Africa that you see a variety of different states start to form over here, especially, of course, the Indo-European people and the Neanderthal tribal confederacies. The Neanderthals, as I said beforehand, because of Yahweh's flood, had more or less de-evolved in some fashion, actually. But because of the influx of white people, they were able to re-emerge from all these new humans, basically like intermixing and breeding and sharing culture and knowledge amongst each other. And so they bounced back. A variety of different states formed in this area. As I've said beforehand, the strongest one being, of course, the atomic states of India. Here we have an Aryan god over here on top of a flying palace known as a Vimana or something. Vimana. Vimanas are flying palaces that basically are nuclear powered, and it's theorized that these multi-armed, multi-head deities or Aryans that are flying these nuclear powered Vimanas are throwing nukes at their various adversaries, right? So they are just dominating the Indian continent here. And India is basically filled with a variety of different warring states that have this advanced technology, throwing nukes at each other and shit. It's a complete war zone over here. The situation is made even worse by a conflict known as the Indo-Brazilian Nega War. As you can see right over here, we have the Battle of Rio Grande do Sul between the Zagurdian dynasty, the Mantoid kingdoms, and the Third Indian Confederacy with the Somali Empire and Turkish mercenaries. You can see this battle over here. These wars are quite magnificent and massive. 3 billion Indians, 300,000 war elephants, 120,000 Turkish bulls. We have 3,000 gorillas, 2 million Brazilians. It is a devastating conflict between what we know as the Finnish Empire and the atomic states of India with their flying nuclear-powered Vimyanas. One day I will talk about the atomic states of India in more detail, but that will be for the future when we talk about the Maya Empire of ancient India. Now, because of the overall destruction of this earlier conflict, which takes place in South America, Indian continent, Lemuria, and outer space, we see the weakening of the Finnish Empire, of the Indian Confederacy over here, which is made up of a multitude of different atomic states with their flying palaces, their nuclear-powered palaces. But we also see here the rise of the Lemurians. The Lemurians basically upseat the Indians here and take over control of much of Proto-India because of that. So you will see after this point the expansion of Lemurians into southern India, while these atomic states of India here are currently becoming weaker and weaker. Rio de Janeiro becomes destroyed. There's Indian bioweapons all over the rainforest of the Amazon. The sewage system of India is completely annihilated and 1 billion of them also die. It's crazy. But over here you can see only 120,000 dead of the Lemurians. They end up actually being the winners in this conflict, even though they only came in after these two were basically done killing each other. And because of that, that will lead to, well, okay, this right here is wrong. You see Finnish conquest of Brazil and Hwan conquest of India, but the Finnish people never conquered Brazil, as you can see right over here. Instead, what ends up happening is that Finnish Empire and the Hwan Empire will divide up this South Asia, West Asia territory here. And that is specifically because the Finns are allied to the Lemurians. So the Finns are going to sweep in and conquer this Indian territory here by permission by the Lemurians. This is also greatly aided by the Great Persian Wars. The Persian Wars, led by Darius XII, basically were a series of wars where the Persian Empire over here of, we don't know which one, it was one of them, one of the Persian empires declared war on not only the Finnish Empire and the Hwan Empire, and it took the Hwan and the Finnish Empire to collaborate to be able to bring down Darius XII. So you see here that there are a multitude of different states that are now rising up that are actually being able to challenge the Finnish and Hwan empires. And so without the Hwan and Finnish collaboration, Darius XII would have never been annihilated. You see here the famous battle of Koskesh, where Darius XII is beheaded by a reincarnation of Wainamoinen. It's not looking good for these independent states. Beforehand, these independent states had been giving tribute to the Hwan Empire and the Finnish Empire. And you can see over here that after, when they're finally done conquering these independent states of India and West Asia, they basically have a smattering of Proto-Indo-European free states and Neanderthal tribal confederacies that exist within Anatolia and over here in the Central Asian territories here. These states are basically relegated to vassal kingdoms, or more or less, they are just treated as buffer states between the Hwan Empire and the Finnish empires here. So if they're not vassals, they're definitely under the thumb of both of these empires in some fashion. The Neanderthals will unfortunately go through, basically, I want to say the word, but it's a G word. So we're just going to write that down right here. It is, yeah, there we go. The Neanderthals are going to go through this twice, okay? The first time, okay, comes from the Hwan Empire moving westward. The second time comes from the Finnish Empire moving eastward. So now the Neanderthals are even in a much more precarious situation at this point of time. However, something good does happen from this collaboration though. That would be apparently the creation of the Giza mass autism array. Because of the threat of the flying palaces, the flying nuclear palaces, and Darius XII, both the Finnish Empire and the Hwan Empire build the Giza mass autism array in order to counter any future attacks moving forward. The Finnish Empire would even create a series of pyramids in the Balkans called the Bosnian pyramids that will help them in being able to ward off any future attacks coming from the south. And so because of that, everything is fine once again. As you can see on this world map right over here, we go from basically the Finnish and Hwan Empires expanding on their own relative territory, right? The Americas are split up into many different states following the retreat of the Atlantean Empire. And we're seeing here, there's still some control and a lot of tribes here. But by this point over here, we see that the Finns and the Hwan have more or less gobbled up a lot of these independent states. And now the Atlanteans are kind of relegated to just this coastline here. Oh, and Southern Africa, of course. That's because Atlanteans were basically using slaves. Where's my pink? The Atlanteans were using slaves to mine metal in South Africa for various purposes that we do not know of yet. There's still going to be some independent states. Over here, we have the Great Mercantile Empire of Hawaii. This empire basically comes from the destruction of the first United States of America. And so because of that, the Hawaiian Empire basically roams around under King Kamehameha III with 29 Dreadnought-class battleships, who, even though it says they control the entire Pacific Ocean, they control only a small smattering. It's still like under control of Mu and like the Emu Confederacy. We also have, of course, the Cossacks of the Levant. They apparently, with the help of Hwan gene golems, which I will talk about in a future video on the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, they also help with the creation of the Giza mass autism array of the pyramids of Giza. This is basically the time where all these states are trying to rise up, and the Finns and the Hwans are just doing everything in their power to stop them from rising up. However, even with all of this being done, even with all of this like imperialism happening, the fact remains is that war between the Hwan and the Finnish Empire is closer now than ever before. Before, what was basically a massive buffer state area, right, where there was only very little like vassals between the Finns and the Hwan, where you see a smattering of different independent states between the two empires that prevented war. Now you see that these empires are closer now than ever before, touching tips in India and in the Middle East and Central Asia. An even smaller smattering of independent states here, preventing all-out conflict. And that is the problem here, is that all-out conflict is inevitable. And unfortunately, the Finno-Korean Hyperwar will happen no matter what now. To talk about the inciting incident that caused the Finno-Korean Hyperwar in our next installment of the video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, give it a comment, and I believe that if you guys are confused, please check out my videos on Fingolia, the Hwan Empire, and Turan to understand everything that we've talked about so far. If anybody has any questions, I'll be in the comments section answering them, or I can make a future video on any of these individual topics in a future installment. This video was made by a bunch of different sources. If you'd like to know the sources for this video, I post them in my Patreon for free, so you can take a look at them neat and tidy. This page over here, the Reddit page where the creator made this map, is where I made most of this story actually. So without him and his map, it would have been very hard to create a narrative that got us to this point. And I'll post a Reddit post in the comments below. Over here, we have another map that was made on Reddit that I also took. However, there wasn't really a story attached to this map. And because there are a lot of mistakes, like the absence of the Emu Confederacy and just like a bunch of other stuff and the addition of other shit and like Hyperborea in Russia for some reason, I more or less ignored some aspects of this map, but I did contend that this map was before the fall of the Atlantean empires and before the Hwan Empire and the Finnish Empire expanded into this like West Asian, South Asian area, so to speak. I'll post a link for both of these maps in the sources page. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you to the Patreon members for making this video possible, like Khan of Han, Yeti, Most Modestly Liquid G, Khan, Frank Udajan, Sono X Sono HX, Magnus, Electric Messiah, TH, Orlando Riveria, Comrade, Albert Lee, Deciboo 189, Cody the Bra, Hero P, Stefan Summer, Samuel Ojeda Lopez, Chris B, Reformatter, Samatier, Thomas O'Leary, Alexander the Smoker, Hispanic Memes, MM Marco, Vanru Pandi, and Alexander Turpin. If you want your name, please support me on Patreon, and I'll post it right over here. And if you don't want me to, if you want me to use a different name or some shit like that, then let me know as well. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for supporting, and I will see you guys in the sequel to this video. Bye-bye. Bah.